Death at Bishop's Keep. Chapter 30. If we believe a thing to be bad, it is our duty to try and prevent it and to damn the consequences. Lord Milner. Aunt Sabrina left the library a few minutes after Aunt Jaggers, saying only that she was going to her room and did not wish to be disturbed. Feeling as if she had been caught in a furious crossfire, as perhaps she had, Kate retrieved 2 or 3 cards that had escaped the flames and picked up the correspondence that Aunt Jaggers had flung on the floor. She noted that it contained a recent already opened letter to Mrs. Farnsworth from Mr. Mathers from Paris. The letter marked "Private and Confidential" must have been inadvertently included with the correspondence of the order which Mrs. Farnsworth had given to Aunt Sabrina. Kate put the envelope on Aunt Sabrina's desk and busied herself with typing of the cipher of transcript for Mr. Yeats. Given Aunt Jaggers' threat to deport her, it was difficult to concentrate on her typing, but Kate pushed her worries to the back of her mind as best as she could, and simply let her fingers do the mechanical work. If Aunt Jaggers was determined that she should not stay, there was hardly anything that she could do to prevent her. Kate was not surprised that Aunt Sabrina did not reappear when it was time for luncheon. The argument with her sister had been bad enough, but the loss of the terror deck must have been even more cruel. To the members of the Golden Dawn, Mr. Mather's precious deck of cards was a spiritual document, a map of the journey to self-transcendence and transformation. The cards were literally irreplaceable, their destruction inconceivable. Kate could now imagine how her aunt would explain it. When Kate went at 1 o'clock to the kitchen to make herself a roast beef and pickled sandwich, the house was a tomb. Aunt Jaggers had ordered luncheon brought to her room. Aunt Sabrina was still absent. Mrs. Pratt was stonily silent. Harriet crept about like a mouse, and poor Nettie was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she had been exiled again to the cellar. Kate thought with a feeling of sad helplessness. Amelia and Mutt were somewhere above stairs, going invisibly about their work. It was another grey, misty day. After she had eaten, Kate pulled on wellies, wrapped herself in a shawl, and went with an umbrella into the garden, where stalks of purple asters vied for pride of place with mounds of yellow chrysanthemums and fragrant lavender. But not even the wistful autumn loveliness of an English garden could keep her mind from Aunt Jaggers' threats. She turned them over uneasily in her thoughts. What hold did the woman have over Aunt Sabrina? Could she really compel Kate's return to America? And what was that odd business about the vicar? What role did he play in the lives of these 2 women? After a while, Kate came back inside and built up the library fire once again, noticing that Aunt Sabrina had been in the room and had taken Mr. Mather's private letter to Mrs. Farnsworth from the desk. 10 minutes later, she was settling down to work. She heard the sounds of wheels on gravel. She opened the French doors that led onto the terrace outside to the library and saw that Pocket, a mackintosh cloak thrown over his shoulders against the rain, had brought the carriage round. Kate turned away from the French doors as Aunt Sabrina came into the library wearing a coat and a fur hat. There was a wild, almost frantic look about her. "Why, Aunt?" Kate said, immediately concerned. "Whatever is the matter?" "I must go out," Aunt Sabrina replied distractedly. She was holding Mr. Mather's letter in her hand. "Must you?" Kate asked. "It's chilly outside, and wet. If you wish to return Mr. Mather's letter to Mrs. Farnsworth, I'm sure I could do it for you just as well." Aunt Sabrina was trembling. "What I have to do, I must do," she said, almost incoherently. "Only I can prevent—" She stopped. "It is a matter of utmost urgency." "Then permit me to go with you," Kate said, beginning to be frightened by her aunt's strange behavior. "If you will wait just a moment while I get my—" "No," Aunt Sabrina said, disregarding Kate's hand on her arm. She pulled on a glove, dropping the other in her haste. "My errands may take some time, Catherine." She picked up the glove and yanked on it. The button snapped off and bounced across the floor, but she did not seem to notice. "I shall likely not be home until after tea." Kate stepped back, dismayed. What could be so urgent about Mr. Mather's letter that it had to be returned on such an inclement day? Why did Aunt Sabrina herself have to do it? What did she hope to prevent? Perhaps, though, the letter was not the real purpose of her errand. Perhaps it was Aunt Jaggers' wanton destruction of the Golden Dawn tarot deck that she was in such a haste to communicate to Mrs. Farnsworth. Kate moved to the fireplace and stood watching her aunt. It was only conjecture that Aunt Sabrina was going to Mrs. Farnsworth. Perhaps she was going to see someone else. Who could it be? But Aunt Sabrina's white, thin-lipped face made it clear that there would be no answer to these questions. Kate reluctantly bade her goodbye and went to the French doors to watch the carriage depart, Pocket giving an encouraging chirrup to the wet horse. When the drive was empty, she returned to her chair and resumed her typing. But while she tried very hard to focus on her task, she could not help worrying about Aunt Sabrina, driving through the rain to some unknown destination to fulfill some unknown purpose. She could not help worrying about herself too, and her mind kept returning to the question she had asked herself in the garden. Could Aunt Jaggers really compel her to leave Bishop's Keep and to return to America? In spite of her troubled thoughts, Kate managed to finish the transcription of the cipher manuscript by tea time. She wasn't quite sure what use Mrs. Yeats would make of it. The magical rituals were fragmentary, not very interesting, and actually rather silly. As far as she could see, its real value was not in its hocus-pocus, but in its history. It was, after all, supposed to be very old, written down by some long-ago secret society, passed from one adept to another, carefully safeguarded by its communication in cipher. Well, Kate thought, putting the transcript aside, whatever the value of the document to Mr. Yeats, it was typed, and neatly too. At least he would be able to read it clearly. Her next task, and by far the most important one she had undertaken so far, was to translate the letters Fräulein Sprengel had written, in German, to Dr. Westcott, giving him the authority she needed to establish the Order of the Golden Dawn. She was looking forward to the work, for she enjoyed translating, and while not an expert in German, she felt she knew it well. But as Kate began to work, she discovered something that was both surprising and puzzling to her. Fräulein Sprengel was supposed to be an educated German woman, but her letters contained several very elementary mistakes in grammar, not to mention numerous spelling errors, the sort usually committed by English speakers with an imperfect knowledge of the language. For example, the word adressiert, to address, was spelled with 2 D's when it should have had but one. The English word secretary appeared in place of the German Sekretär, and lodge had been used instead of Loge. Kate pressed her lips together and shook her head. If she had not been told differently, she would have guessed that the letters, which were of vital importance to anyone concerned with the order's legitimacy, had been written by an Englishman who was only superfluously acquainted with German. This guess would have been further supported by the fact that Fräulein Sprengel's name and modern address were part of a document which purported to be quite ancient. But the business of the ciphered document seemed academic. Kate had a larger and more immediate problem to worry about, and anyway it was getting late. She was getting tired. She folded the letters and put them back into the box, her mind returning to her own dilemma. What would she do if Aunt Jaggers insisted she leave, and Aunt Sabrina had neither the will nor the strength to withstand her sister? Kate stood up and went to the French doors to look out at the afternoon. The rain had stopped and the clouds were clearing away. A pale, translucent light seemed to suffuse the landscape. She rested her cheek against the cool glass and stared out the rain-wet trees. What could she do to prevent Aunt Jaggers from sending her back to America? She had been at Bishop's Keep only a few weeks, but she already felt at home here, and the idea of leaving was surprisingly painful. She twisted a lock of hair around her finger, considering what she could do. Unfortunately, there did not seem to be many choices. She suspected that Aunt Sabrina might find it easier to let her go than to confront her sister, whose threat of revelation of what, had almost seemed to annihilate her. And without Aunt Sabrina's protection, she would be, much like Jenny Blyly, homeless. But not, Kate thought, helpless. She straightened her shoulders and her lips firmed. Aunt Jaggers might be able to eject her from Bishop's Keep, but she could not force her onto the boat. In circumstances, Aunt Sabrina would probably be generous in the matter of severance pay. She would have what she earned so far, and Beryl Bardwell was due a payment from Frank Leslie's popular monthly when she delivered Conspiracy of the Golden Scarab. She might be able to find a cottage to let in Dedham or in Colchester, where she could see Aunt Sabrina from time to time. Kate stepped back from the window, already beginning to feel better. No, she could not prevent Aunt Jaggers from doing whatever she chose to do, but she was not by nature one who surrendered easily. If she were forced to leave, she was resourceful enough to fend for herself. Unlike Jenny Blyly, she knew how she would survive.